Okay, so welcome if you've just joined us. Good morning. I'm Paul Furey if you haven't been here before, and we're going to start in a couple of minutes now. We're just waiting for people to get through the door. And yeah, it's all about empathy, my particular hobby horse. It's what I did my doctoral studies on. So it's something that I have been thinking about for a very long time and doing and seeing when it doesn't happen. So it's an exciting topic and I hope you'll get plenty from it. We've got people still coming in the door, so we're going to wait until the last minute before we start. In case you haven't been to one of these things before, it's very easy. You can just sit there and noodle. If you have a question or if something pops into your head, the really smart thing to do would be to just scribble it down or put it straight into the Q&A pane that you've got on your control panel on your screens, and then bring it up at the end. I guarantee that I'll answer all the questions that you have, even if we have to go into injury time. So basically, I will do about 35 minutes of material, and then I'll stop, do a summary, absolutely by about 10 past. We'll finish by quarter past, so people who are on an absolute schedule on a dead stop for quarter past can get away, and then I'll come back and do the Q&A, or finish off doing Q&A. Today I'm going to add something new, which is a free-for-all, which I've been talking about for a bit, which is when you can ask things which are totally off topic. Absolutely anything you like to do with, well, leadership, interpersonal stuff, team tensions, conflict, tricky situations, aggression, ethics, communication, giving bad news, absolutely anything, personality clashes. So you can chuck anything at me, and I'll have a go at giving you a point of view at least. So just a minute or two to go. As usual, Nicola is in the background driving things, so many thanks to Nicola, who's directly above me, above this studio, sorting everything out of the back end for people who can't get in the door for whatever reason. So thank you very much to her. I'm just literally going to take a couple of minutes now just to sort out my timings to make sure that things flow properly. So bear with me, people are still walking in. So make yourselves comfortable, and I'll see you in a bit. And good morning. If you've just joined, I'm Paul Furey, and welcome to this webinar on empathy. Empathy, what is it and where does it belong in business? We've got an absolutely packed 45 minutes for you. If you've just joined, welcome. We've got a great crowd of you today, and I'm determined to make it worth your while. There are some regulars. Hi, Jeff. Nice to see you. Hugh, lovely to see you too. John Wilson, great. And Kate, lovely to see you back. Linda, I think we've seen you before, and I've said hello to some others already. Paul, long time no see. Great, all the way down there in Wales. I think that's where you are. And oh yes, and Rachel, good morning to you. Nice to see you, or at least in name, and then lots of other. Thurko, I think that's how I pronounce your name. I haven't seen your name before. Forgive me if I have, but welcome if not. And yeah, lots of others that I can't. If I do the whole roll call, we'll use up all the time. So if you haven't done one of these before, it's very easy. You can just rest easy, sip your coffee, listen and sit back and think. If you have a question, scribble it down while I'm going along and then bring it in at the end, or post it immediately in the Q&A tab. It would be great to get your questions. I'm going to leave some special time for that at the end. Also today, a different thing, we're doing something called a free-for-all. So after a quarter past, you can raise any topic you like whatsoever. It would be great to hear and see what you come up with. So I'm going to get my camera out of the way for now. But just before I do, my aims in all these webinars are to promote some simplicity, to bring some psychology into it all, some thinking behind why we do things, trying to solve some of the puzzles that we have about each other and why we fall out, why it can turn out to be so difficult to do business together. But what I really want you to do after this, yes, think about it, but go off and try something. And this topic, more than most, lends itself to experimentation, to taking some risks. And some of the things I'm going to ask you to tangle with this morning, it probably is familiar territory in some shape or form, but this is really all about doing something, and doing something which actually seems quite difficult for many people. But I want you to really take the chance. Yeah, I think that's probably the main thing. So let me locate this first of all. I'm going to get rid of the camera as promised, and then you can just concentrate on the screen. I want to locate what I'm talking about today in the way that we work with our clients, and why empathy is so important. And this will, I think, make it all stack up in the grand scheme of things. So we believe, and I sort of tripped over this a long time ago, probably about 10 or 15 years ago. I figured that there was the same things were happening again and again, and I hadn't read them anywhere. And there's lots of amazing books on group dynamics and how people function. But what I hadn't seen is any kind of really simple explanation for what I was seeing. And what I figured out that there were three sort of layers of elements of competence. And hang on a second, there's a random word on the screen which doesn't belong. I added last thing. Here we go. Let's get rid of you. Bosh, gone. I'll come back to that one in half an hour. So there was sort of three areas of competence, three things that people and groups needed to be able to do to function really well together, to be able to get through any business problem or team issue, and therefore to be able to get on in an undistracted way with running the business. And we literally tripped over these by accident. So the first one, the first sort of molecule to the system, to this perfect system, was that people needed to have an intellectual grasp of what was happening in the room. They needed to be able to understand. The second thing was that they needed to be able to see it in action. I'm doing that thing. Oh, and I can hear my words tumbling out of my mouth, or I can see myself going through that routine, or I can see Jane doing that thing that she does, that interrupting thing. And once I saw that people would kind of knew it, and they could see it happening, that already gave them what we might call self-awareness. But that's not enough. And what I found myself doing was actually working with people to get them to talk about what they were actually seeing, so that they and the people they were with could do something about it. It could give them some power. And then we needed to find a way to get them to hang on to what they'd learned to do. And that was the whole keep it bit. It had to be, this development couldn't be done by training, too much feeling, too many subtleties involved to be able to train people to do it. And so we developed a way to build it with people. And it's kind of creating this sort of rather sort of wispy atmosphere. And we do it, broadly speaking, in the same sorts of ways every time. We create a safe environment for people to think and to speak off the record, and then to experiment. And that's what I'm trying to generate here with you this morning, although there's distance between us is a bit difficult. But actually, the whole spirit of it is to, yes, think about it, but try something out. So we see this as a sort of stable, sort of molecular system where all of the components are needed for the whole thing to work. And that's how we go about developing people's capability, group capability, organizational capability. We're always coming back to these basic atoms, these molecules. Okay, so that's the location for it. Now I want to get down to actually the real bare bones, the foundations of empathy, because that's what we're about here. So I'm going to show you a number of different images, and I'd just like you to privately note, and if, by the way, if you want to put it up in the Q&A tab, if you want to put up what you're noticing, that would be terrific, and I'll keep an eye on that and call a few things out. But here are some images, and just notice what happens with your feelings and with your eyes. Firstly, that. Notice where your eye starts, where your gaze travels, and how you feel when you see that. Here's another. What are you noticing? What sort of things is it stirring up in you? What about this one? And this one? What are you noticing about your reactions? Your feelings? And here's the last one for now. So what's actually happening here is that we're always reading the environment for what to do next. We're taking things in. It doesn't matter whether it's a jungle pool or a police cordon or a safe or an unsafe looking bridge. And what we get is these visceral, these physical reactions. And these are the basis for empathy between humans. Some organisms, some animals also have this ability to read each other's thoughts, or feelings rather. And some animals probably can read thoughts, but we're restricted to feelings for sure. So a couple of you, joy and fear, and Ben, you said that my eyes follow the natural path, the river, the building. Yeah. But every time we see something, we have feelings. Every time we hear something, we have feelings. And sometimes they're very small. But often we shut out these reactions, particularly if they're unpleasant, like this one, like the police cordon. And what in fact they found when they were doing, if you remember, if you were alive back in the 70s, they started putting some really difficult advertisements on to try and get people to wear their seat belts. And what they found was that if they made the advertisements, these warnings, too strong, people shut off. And that's indeed what we do in work situations when we get frightened, and it is usually fear. And I'm going to be saying more about fear in a few minutes' time. So let me move now to more human scenarios, the ones that are more obviously recognizable in our everyday lives. So have a look at this one here and the sort of feelings that you notice in you and in them. What are you noticing there? And what about here? So in the first, probably there's definitely some sadness. Girl looks upset, mother not. He looks concerned, yes. Interestingly, I read this one interestingly as puzzled. What about this one? This one's more tricky. Have a go on your screen. Cover up the bottom half of the screen so you're covering up everything from his nose downwards, and just look at his eyes. And then take a punt at the feeling. Then do the opposite. Cover up his eyes and just look at his mouth. So everything from the nose upwards covered. And you may find that you're reading different things. The fact is we're taking in these pictures, but as I've just said, we tend to keep this brilliant insight and information to ourselves. This one's rather obvious, although again, if I was tangling with discussing this with Vianne last night, my daughter, she read this completely differently. So she looked at his mouth and thought, oh, he's happy. But I said, no, cover up his mouth and look at his eyes, and he doesn't look so happy. So here's the interesting thing as well. Even though we read feelings or emotion in other people differently, it really doesn't matter if we get it wrong. The important thing is, one, that we spot it, and two, that we go to the trouble to tell the person that we've spotted it. Now, there are some consequences to not doing any of this. In fact, consequences to staying quiet. So one of the things that disappears, or one of the things that's there by default, is goodwill. You know, when we're having a meeting with somebody, we get a cup of coffee, we might buy them a bun or a biscuit or something. You know, it just kind of oils the wheels, and it's just nice. We want to enjoy work. But one of the things that happens when people stop caring about each other or stop noticing each other's feelings is that goodwill disappears. So that's the first thing. And we know when goodwill's disappeared when the conversation starts to get difficult. The other thing that happens is that we actually become adversaries. Now, this is wonderful sometimes. It's exciting. But when we're trying to make decisions or move a business on, it makes life much more energetic and much more time consuming. Business shouldn't be a sport of feelings and of strength. It should be a total game of skill. Now, here, of course, there's a lot of skill being displayed, but my gosh, there is a lot of strength and energy as well. And this lack of empathy also increases otherness. It helps us to revel in the differences that are between us, how we are different and separate to each other. That's really unhelpful. It's interesting if we go on holiday and we see the Indian and Bangladeshi guards in this ceremony, this drawing down of the colours every evening ceremony. But actually, when we're trying to get on with making decisions or making something happen, it's a huge time-consuming, energy-consuming distraction. Now, in business, there's something else that can also happen, which is that when we don't pay attention to each other, there is usually already polarization in the room. But what happens is that when there is polarization and we don't actually connect with each other's feelings, even if we disagree, we split the room. We force people to choose sides. And then we've got a real problem, because in terms of compliance or action, we'll only ever get a proportion of the room following us to action. So even if there's not a bust up in the room, if there's a lack of empathy demonstrated, it's a good chance that we'll lose a few or lots of the people in the room. And the worst thing is we won't even know that it's happened. The other thing that we do by not empathizing, by not calling it out, is that we create a tradition where things get set in stone. They get written into books. It's a tradition of not listening, of fighting, of tussling, of healthy challenge. Yes, healthy challenge is great, but healthy challenge when people are listening to each other is the optimum. And the really interesting thing is, it all goes on the flick of a switch. There is that decision moment when we see somebody opposite us in opposition. They've said something and we think, oh, I don't agree with that. Or, oh no, I don't want them to think that. I want them to think this thing, the thing that I want. And at that point, we have an opportunity, and it is just a second or two, to be aware and to decide, am I going to carry on pushing my agenda, or am I going to park my feelings and pay attention to them? Now, We can flick the switch at different times when we become aware, but very often our awareness goes out of the window really quickly. So before we get into the mechanics of empathy, I want to do some thought decontamination, because there are a lot of beliefs that we have about empathy, and it gets all tangled up with other things like sympathy, onto which I will come in a moment. But some things that I really, really want to take out of your minds about empathy, if indeed they are there now. First thing is, it has absolutely nothing to do with agreement. But here's the bind. When we're actually doing it, it can be really scary. It can feel, as I empathise with you, it can feel like I'm falling into step with you. It's not. Empathy is me observing and telling you what I've seen. It's not agreement. The second thing about empathy is that it is not sympathy. It's not me feeling sorry for you, and it's not me aligning myself with your worldview. It's me making a connection. And the third thing with empathy, and it's always the same, I have one of my best friends from army days, a chap called Ian, and this guy, terrific, brain the size of a planet. However, he found it very effortful, and I don't think he had anything malfunctioning up top, but he found it effortful to tune into people's feelings. And so he could see the feeling, and he would put it into words, but there was something a bit mechanical. And so he would have a go at saying, "Oh, you seem really fed up with that," particularly with his wife. I have to know them both very well. And he couldn't understand why I would then turn around and say something empathic. And she would say, "Oh, it's really nice of you to notice." And he'd say, "What the hell's going on there?" It was because he was faking it, and I really wanted to understand. Okay, so there are some things that I really would wish you to challenge, if not to remove entirely from your minds in terms of your conceptions of what empathy is and isn't. So I want to come back to the whole sympathy thing, because this is really important. That's the one that people get stuck on, particularly people who care a lot, who really want to help. And this is an important one to grasp. Okay. So here, on the same day, in two separate locations, are two pits of despair. Two people in a really bad place. Now, it doesn't matter whether it was their fault or not. They're just in a bad place. We'll take that for granted. So what happens? Well, over the sympathy pit, the person comes along and starts to say things like, "Poor you. Oh, that's rotten. Oh, it's really not your fault. What are you going to do? Oh, isn't it awful? Oh, he's such a nasty bloke." Or, "Oh, she's always been like that." So that's the whole agreement. You're hearing it, agreement, sympathy piece coming along. Now, what actually happens there? Well, I'll tell you in a second what the consequences are. However, over on the empathy pit side, a couple of kilometres away, this person, the empathizer, is actually doing a completely different job. She or he are not climbing into the pit, but they are pointing out what they see in the person who's suffering. You look fed up. You look worried. You're obviously annoyed. And it could be anger. It could be the small diminishing feelings, or it could be the big fat angry ones that are lashing out. But the point here is that the sympathizer gets involved. They think they have to agree to be compelling listeners, to win the confidence of the person who they're listening to, the distressed person. The empathizer regards it much more as an emotional/intellectual exercise. And what the empathizer does is more sustainable. They can keep it up. So what are the consequences here? What actually ends up happening? Well, in the sympathy pit, eventually the sympathizer ends up in the pit with the individual, because often the individual rejects the inevitable advice that comes streaming out. The empathizer has had to be a lot stronger, a lot more, how shall I put it, separated from the distress. Even though they might be feeling some themselves, they've kept it at bay by concentrating, focusing on the other person's feelings. And then miraculously, well, I could run a whole webinar just on this bit, the other person actually becomes more resourceful. They start to hear themselves and hear their thoughts and hear their feelings and do self-examination. And that's why it pans out. That's why they can get themselves out of the hole. So, how does this actually work? What are the actual mechanics of this? All right. So, firstly, as I said, awareness is fine, but what does it actually look like when we do this, or what does it sound like? So I'm going to whip through some examples here. Firstly, well, I'm going to do some examples. I'm not actually going to put up the structure, and maybe have a go, if you're not terribly familiar with this, have a go at spotting what the commonalities are in my statements. So I'm going to go from sort of practical to theory, which is the way we like to do it. So firstly, for someone who's puzzled, I'm going to choose real names. Ben, you seem puzzled about the manual that we've printed for you. Okay, here's resistance. You look skeptical that it's going to do the job for you. Annoyance. Sarah, you sound annoyed that this project is so late. Dave, you sound uncomfortable about going ahead with this decision on the budget. Now, I'm wondering what you're spotting there. So here are the bits. The first piece is, you probably will have noticed, is I'm focusing in on the feeling. You might have also noticed that I always start with the word you. It's just easier. You sound, you look, you seem, you're obviously. As you get used to it, and you might have already, but as you do, you can say, well, I've noticed you're really annoyed. And that's okay. But my main focus here is to stay out of the picture. The second piece of it is to do the what about. It's important here to be really specific. You sound annoyed about the fact that this report's late. You sound skeptical that this manual's going to work for your audience. And the third bit is, and this is the bit I haven't been using so far. This is the synthesis bit. This is me saying, why might they be so having this feeling so much about that thing? So this is where I really get some brownie points. Carol, you're obviously worried about this project, the budget and going over budget. I guess that's because you know that there's just no more money in the pot. This is it. So I'm trying to figure out, why is Carol so worried about the budget on this particular project? Because she doesn't normally get so worried. So I'm trying to use my imagination. So that is the basic structure. And actually the first, let's say, little competition notice here, first 20 people that come back after this webinar, having tried it out, drop us a line, and the first 20 people are going to get a little card, a little credit card thing that goes in your personal wallet to remind you of these different bits, and there's lots of information on there besides. So first 20 people to try this out for real and come back to us after the webinar gets one of these cards, and it's got this exact structure on there. Okay, there's one thing that I haven't told you so far, which is this business here. When you've made the statement, so it sounds like, here we go, Alan, you sound really pleased about the way this this particular interview turned out, it sounds like that's because you thought that it was going to be a total waste of time. And then I pause to let Alan come back at me and either correct me or to agree with me. You'll notice that that last one was about something positive. Empathy is also about noticing when somebody's having something good happening to them. But that's what the pause is about. Really important. Okay, moving on. So some do's and don'ts. Okay, well, firstly, here we go. That's where the do came in. The feeling is 80% of it. Even if you manage to point out to somebody, Jane, you sound really fed up, or Fiona, you look worried, that's already amazing, because Fiona then knows that I've noticed her and that I care. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the business of duration, of how you go on. It's really, really important. Let me just move this down here. It's really important here that you don't waste words. And I would even go so far as to say, try not to say more than one thing at a time. So be brief. And thirdly, be specific. That's really important. Focusing on the exact thing that they are having the feeling about. Here are some avoids. I understand. Even if you're right, who's going to believe you? So when somebody says, oh, I understand, prove it. The only person who I know who can get away with that is someone of her age. If somehow, when I see her face, if she said, and if I could understand Greek, because she is a Greek lady, if she said, I understand, I think, yeah, you probably do. But since most of us in work are not that age and we're not that trustworthy, we're going to have to prove it. So saying those words, I understand, doesn't cut it. The other thing to do is to avoid stupid questions. We already know, and you've proved that to yourself early on the early screens today, that you know how to read people's feelings. So don't go there. Don't ask them, oh, you see someone feeling uncomfortable and then you say, are you all right? Of course they're not all right. You already established that. And that's a real wind up too. Work a bit harder is what I say. You don't look happy. Bang, you've established a connection with the person who was feeling lonely, probably rather isolated, and they didn't think that anybody would either spot it or certainly wouldn't call it out. You've just done some magic if you do. So, here are some consequences of when we do empathise, and this is where the magic happens. And I don't want to over-intellectualise this, but some of you might like to latch on to the fact that there is some real hard molecular level science going on here. One of the things that's happened, this has only come about, we've only been able to really judge this in the last few years, is that brain chemistry changes and brain functioning, in fact. When somebody isn't calling out their feelings, which is obviously the ripe time in the conversation to call them out for them by empathising with them. You look annoyed, Gemma, or whatever. As soon as they admit to that and start to name their own feelings, their brain instantly switches to a different kind of functioning. So whereas the amygdala, which is right slap bang in there, it is in charge, it then changes. In fact, that's the front here, actually. So it's the amygdala's in here. This is the brainstem. So this is the person. If this was on a person, they would be facing the left-hand side of your screen. But on the other side, behind this chap, in fact, fairly under where he's standing, on the right-hand side of our brain, sort of in our temples, in the right orbito-prefrontal cortex, is a tiny little collection of cells which actually fire up when we name our feelings. So the quicker we can get somebody into the territory of talking about feelings, or a meeting, if we actually talk about the truth of what's going on, people's brains alter their functioning. Wow, isn't that amazing? Worth pitching for. The second thing that happens is that we do away with some of the rather unhelpful social cycles, and we haven't left this behind. The difference now is that we don't kick people and we don't wear armour and use swords, but actually this happens every day in your office, by email, by text, and in meetings. We do still give each other a beating, but we do it with words, with silence, by withdrawing goodwill. We make it far less likely that this can happen, that people can get hurt by us, albeit unintentionally, if we're prepared to pay attention to how they're feeling and then let them know that we've noticed. The other thing that empathizing does is it slows down the action. I don't know if you've ever been stupid enough like me to stand at the top of a board where you don't belong, but you're sort of machismo, and the fact that your family are down by the pool 10 metres below sort of drives you to it, that one last vestige of proof that you're still a man or still a woman. And you get up there and you think, oh, I shouldn't be here. I don't need to be super mum, girlfriend. I don't need to be super dad. I should just go down the ladder. But you can't, because the ladder is crammed with people coming up. But it makes you think. It makes you stop. Empathy does the same thing. It slows down the action. It makes people consider their feelings and their actions and their words. So those are the consequences, or some of the consequences of empathy. Okay, we're coming up. I think what we'll do now is I'll throw it over to you for a couple of questions, and let's see what comes up. There's a little bit more material, a couple more screens I wanted to share with you. I might do that straight after 1:15 in the Q&A time, but for now, let's get to find out what you're thinking. What are you thinking? What are any questions that have come to mind whilst I've been talking? Any thoughts? I will let you ponder for a second. Anything that would stop you doing this, for example? What would get in your way? What would make you uncomfortable? So Catherine's got a question. What do you do when you're a bit frightened of how, say, angry someone is and you expect a lot of recrimination? Well, the people are different. Where I think some of us are more frightened with anger, and others are more frightened by tears or put off by tears. And I think there is that top board moment where it's throwing yourself off, Catherine, not fully knowing what's going to happen next. The alternative is to stand there and do what you've done before, which is to feel frightened, which you're probably perfectly resilient enough to put up with. Of course you are. But actually venturing into a totally different space might be worth a punt. And I can tell you that it always moves the conversation on. Hopefully that works. I'm going to switch on my camera so that I can actually see you when you're... there we go. So this one's from Ben. Ben, sometimes a team has different people with different levels of comfort of empathy. How can a chair create mutual levels of comfort with expressing feelings honestly? Well, that's an interesting one, Ben. The chances are, and here's one tip, we don't actually have to use the word feelings at all. So you can say, you don't look happy, or you seem uncomfortable, or Jane, you have reservations. And people don't think we're talking about feelings. People tend to think we're talking about feelings when we ask people how they feel, or we keep on using the feeling word. I feel this and you feel that. So Ben, the way around that maybe is to stealth them into doing it by not using the word feel, but using the names of feelings. Hopefully that works for you. Sarah has a question. This answers my big bugbear with corporate life, the false adversarial approach and the unnecessary hoops we end up having to jump through because of not treating each other as real humans. People think they have to play a different role at work and drop their humanness. You're absolutely right, Sarah. And my punt would be that the reason they do that is because they think that the person at home isn't strong enough, that the person at home will not be taken seriously. The irony is, of course, that at home, that's life for real. And what I mean by that is, at home, it's our money, our house, human beings in our family. All the relationships count at home. At work, you might not be there in 2 years' time. So there's a thought to take into work. The person who runs your home life, you, could be running a piece of the company if you let her or him. Any other? Oh, there are more questions. They've come in while I've been talking. Okay, Kate. I think in meetings where there is a lot of politics in the room, people are not honest about their feelings. Why? Because feelings are probably seen as weak and of no consequence, and they're very difficult to put on a spreadsheet. And sometimes, that's the first thing. Sometimes people just forget. They start having the feeling, they start doing it, they start misbehaving or being too much, and then they're past it. They no longer have insight. They can't see themselves. They don't have this camera on themselves. And that's where the know it, see it, say it bit is important, because knowing it and seeing it is really important. It's a fundamental capability. I won't call it a skill, but it's something that we have to wake up in ourselves and practice. Best done in times of low stress. Practice when you're having your lunch today. Notice how you're feeling. Notice how you're behaving towards people who come and join you at the table in the cafeteria. One more question and then I'm going to do the summary. Joe says, I want to use this to mediate between two people who are not working together to try and get them to empathise with each other. Can I? Yes, you can. Absolutely. They might not learn very quickly to empathise with each other, but what you'll get them to do is maybe to do that empathy for them so that they stop. They have that diving board moment to say, oh, I didn't realise I was doing that. They may twig really quickly, and I definitely think, Joe, it would be a fantastic idea. Kate has an example. There's other stuff. I'm going to come back to. There's 3 or 4 more questions. I'll come back to those in a moment. I'm going to do a summary first and say goodbye to the people who absolutely have to go no matter what at 1:15. So bear with me, but don't go away if I haven't answered your question. So let me just get rid of that. So final thoughts. The first one is be honest. Call out the feeling that you see, and that will be tremendously helpful to the other person. Be honest. The second is be bold. To your point, Catherine, if anger is tricky to address, and you've got some other way of addressing it, which is maybe, I don't know, to keep your head down, or to smile, or to be charming, or to look interested and earnest, calling it out will seem like a bold thing to do. But once you release yourself from the old fear, you'll be like this little chap here. And be brief. Be brief and remember to pause. You look unhappy, Trudy. You look worried, Jane. That's enough. If you can add the what about and why, fantastic. But the fewest words, be telegraphic. And that's it for today. I'm so pleased that you joined us. If you have to dash off, I totally understand. I don't know what the next webinar is going to be, but if you have suggestions, it would be great to hear them. We're going to be sending out a recording link. We're going to get the recording sorted out, edited, and so on and so forth. And I'm also going to send out a link to a couple of YouTube videos. Some of you don't know, but we produce short cartoons involving the stickies and the little people who appear from time to time on here, as you can see, and they star in these films. And there are a couple of them that involve empathy, so I will be doing. I'll be forwarding you that. As always, thank you so much to Nicola for all the work that she does. She comes in very early on webinar mornings to sort out the various lists and who can get in and who can't, and who's logged in properly, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much. And of course, thank you very much to you all for entrusting us with your precious Friday morning. I know it's when we're all trying to clear our desks, so it's great to see new names and ones that we've seen for some of you for years. So yeah, wonderful to have you all on board. 10:14 now. I'm going to stop. Please stick around if you can. I've got a little bit more material for you. We've got some outstanding questions. If you can't stick around, have a fantastic rest of your Friday. Have a great bank holiday weekend, and I hope to see you very soon. If you, unless you object, if you just tell me if this isn't okay with you, but my colleague Kasia Murphy would very much like to give a few of you a call. She has spoken to some of you before. She won't ring you again after this webinar, but would very much like to know what you think of the webinars, which bits stick, what's helpful, what you'd like us to cover, and things like that. And what we are doing is to organise a lunch and learn session, a 1-hour workshop for people who want it, who help us out with a conversation with Kate. So if you want to organise a totally free lunch and learn for your people, up to 20, so it's 7 to 20 people, if you'll take a call from Kasia, then we can organise that for you. And she's absolutely delightful, and it'll just really help us to know that we're aiming this correctly for you. So enough said. It's 10:15. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you on the other side. Take care. So if you can stick around, I'm going to go back to the outstanding questions that we had. And it's a couple of other little bits of material that I had for you that I haven't managed to cover yet. So the bits that I didn't manage to cover is the bit about what's stopping us, and people have various reservations which prevent them, notwithstanding a really complete explanation from me. There are still some things that get in our ways, and I wanted to name a couple of them, because they might be, or in fact what you could do if you wanted to is you could say what it is that gets in your way, what it is that might get in the way of you empathizing with somebody. Catherine already said, anger might be the one that she finds difficult to face up to, but what gets in your way? You might want to post that up. The ones that come up again and again with groups are these. One of the ones is that people are worried about conceding ground. It's back to this business of letting people think that I've noticed the bad thing that they've noticed about, maybe it's about a contract or a deal, and by talking about it, I've blown the situation. I've blown my bargaining position. I've shown them all my cards, and actually, that's not the truth, because when somebody is already having a thought, they can't unthink it, and if we tune into them and are prepared to call out the thing that may be to our disadvantage, then they will have, you can imagine, immense respect for our honesty. So that's one tough one, this risk of conceding ground. Other people, and somebody called it out, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Ben. It was Ben. Ben said about different levels of comfort with empathy. Some people think they think that people will think it's weird if they start calling out feelings. And actually most people don't notice the quote unquote weirdness. Also, some people are worried about getting it wrong, getting the wrong feeling. That also doesn't matter. You don't have to kick yourself if you get the wrong feeling, simply because the other person will just correct you. So I might say to somebody, you seem apprehensive. And they say, no, I'm not apprehensive. Actually, I'm a bit irritated. Oh, God, I really had that wrong. So when I was explaining about X, Y, Z, that actually annoyed you the way I did it. And they can say, yes, bingo, I'm on the same sheet as they are. So getting it wrong is not a problem. So those are three things that get in the way. I'd be interested to hear your other ones. Here we go. So Kate's got one here. Example, someone looking worried, skeptical about a new system coming in, RFD, would say, I'm not impressed because I think it'll cost more. I think it's far more likely to be because he's insecure about his ability to learn new stuff. But he would never admit this. Very interesting, Kate. So there, the opportunity there, I think, Kate, is to go with the surface feeling that he's given you. So you're skeptical that it's going to return good value for money. I guess also, I'm wondering if there's any apprehension there about picking up a whole load of new applications, and just look him in the eye, using language that is not pejorative, that doesn't put the person in a hole, is helpful, and stating it in a matter-of-fact way. The thing that's different between empathy and sympathy is that we don't have to do it in our caring voice. We can just look the person in the eye and say, that sounds like it would bother you. I'm wondering if it would bother you as well, if it would be a real pain for you to learn a whole load of different things. Because of your schedule, or because the board won't want you to put a foot wrong. So there's always a logical reason that's going on, but calling out the feeling might really help. Hopefully that helps, Kate. Linda asked, when we empathise with deep despair, how does one handle the pain which can be transferred? Oh, that's a really good one, Linda. Yeah. Wow. Okay. First thing that pops into my head there is then to go to anonymise situation. If you think it's stuck, well, two things. At the time, Carl Rogers always used to maintain that if one of his therapies, one of his clients was becoming sort of in some way emotionally disabled or distracted, he would give himself permission, in a very uncharacteristic, very apparently untherapeutic thing to do, to talk about his feelings. So he might come out with something like, I can see you're distressed, and actually, I notice myself welling up as well, hearing your story. And he would allow himself to say that, but only when certain conditions were met. When it was interfering with his thinking, when he thought it would help the other, etc., etc., etc. I can't remember all there were 7. I don't know. I can't remember how many conditions, but there were very strict rules. So that's the first thing. You can actually talk about your feelings. The second one is go and talk to somebody else afterwards. Don't tell them who it was, but say, "Gosh, I've come away and I am actually really down about it," and sort through your own feelings as a separate issue. Hopefully that helps, Linda. Hugh, I didn't understand the pictures of the people at the start and their conflicting expressions and partial expressions. Was the point that they were leaking their real emotions? Oh, no, the conflicting expressions, it wasn't between them, Hugh. It was just giving people some sort of mental exercise at looking at those faces and trying to figure out how those people might be feeling. So it was a feeling reading exercise. Phil, how do you counter resistance to empathy in work? So I'm assuming, Phil, it's something along the lines of somebody says, "No, I'm not feeling that," or "No, it's not that. No, I'm not annoyed. I'm da 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 da." I'm wondering, Phil, if you're still in the room, if that's what you were talking about. I'm just having a quick look up and down the list. I think Phil had to go. So Phil, anyway, that was Phil's question, and actually, it's to persevere. Well, you do look really fed up, and often that will also work. Hillary says people might think it's none of my business how they're feeling. Yes, and yet they've made it your business because they're having the feelings in front of you. And actually, experience suggests or shows that actually people are relieved when we go to the trouble to point out their feelings in a humble, respectful way. You look fed up. You look worried. I mean, in your case, Hillary, I could empathise with you and say you're worried about empathising in case you're treading on someone's toes, getting too personal. Hopefully that works. Kate, what gets in my way is people not being honest about their feelings. Yes. And here's the reality check. If somebody wants to continue to be dishonest about their feelings, that's fine. And you just can't do too much about that, except for persevere and know that you've read them. And be prepared to bring it up again. Joe... Oh, yes, good question. And this is a sort of repeat. How do you react to a defensive response to your shout out? Another thing I've heard myself say is, "Oh, I had that wrong. I misread you. You're not annoyed." And the person will really struggle to then say, "No, I'm not annoyed. I'm just a bit da-da-da-da." And then they'll tell you the truth. So you can retract. "Oh, I got that wrong. I'm really sorry. I misread you." I did notice something though. So that's another way to persevere. I'm noticing something though. It's not just me, is it? Persevere. Be bold. Linda, how do you follow it if they deny it and you can see it because it's glaring you in the face? Well, yeah, I've just done that one. So I've got that. So you're not annoyed, but I'm seeing something that I'm not understanding then. I think you got it right with the machismo. Culture is dominated at the top by hierarchy and therefore is only male feelings that are okay to express, e.g. anger. Yes. Great. Okay, I think that's all of the questions finished. I'm just going to make 100% because sometimes when I pull the panel out there, that's all the questions. So it just remains me to say thank you very much indeed for joining. Do send in your here's the little card that you could get showing empathy. There we go. There it is. You could get yourself one of these cards. First 20 people to go off and try it and drop us a few lines gets one of those. And we need your address as well, of course. We can't email it. And we will see you very soon. In a couple of months' time, we might have an impromptu webinar next month, but we'll give everybody the heads up. Thanks for joining. Have a fabulous bank holiday weekend. Bye for now.